Ruby Anna Wiens. I was born in June of 1928 on the prairies of Saskatchewan, Canada. My family consisted of 5 girls and 2 boys, and I was the youngest in the family, quite a bit younger than my older siblings. My oldest sister was 20 years older than I was. She got married the summer I was born. Her name was Josephine, and then there was Amanda and Alfred and Grace and Arthur and Elizabeth. No, I can't remember at any one time that all of us lived at home. There were, I had a brother and a sister who lived at home during the time that I was growing up. The others were all out working or attending school. In our rural schools, we could only attend through the 10th grade, and then if we wanted to continue on to high school, we would have to go to a town nearby, live with family or friends, and finish our high school in that way. My father played a big role in my life because he was my father, he was my teacher, and it was interesting always going home with a teacher at the end of the day. But he never played favoritism with his children. He taught all 7 of us, grades 1 through grade 8, and then we took 9 and 10 by correspondence course, and then went away to high school. I had a lot of admiration for my dad. He was a very hard-working man. He was also, in addition to being a teacher, he was also a preacher. So he was a very busy person. And he and my mother had a wonderful relationship. I didn't live in town until I was a junior in high school. I always lived out in the country. And the school district provided a home for the teacher right on the school property. So that's where I grew up. I just had to run across the yard from where we lived to the school. It was very convenient, and I enjoyed living that way. The town that was closest to where I grew up was a little town called Menin, and basically it provided a post office, grain elevators, and a store where we shopped. It was always a fun experience for a child. Usually got to buy some candy at the store. If we wanted to do more major shopping, we had to travel a little bit further, and I remember going with my parents, and I would always get a nickel to buy some candy, and that was always an exciting thing for me. The store carried some dry goods, like limited clothing basically for the farm families, and it had groceries, and I can't remember all the things that they carried, but the shopping was somewhat limited, and so we didn't always depend on the store either, because we had a big garden and grew all our own vegetables. So, but it was, for me as a child, it was always very exciting to go to town and to go to the local store. We had a car when I was growing up. The car that I remember, 2 cars that I remember specifically, were a car called a Whippet and a Model A Ford, which we drove until I was a senior in high school. So, and then my dad bought a new car after World War II, and it was a Plymouth, a 1946 Plymouth, and those were the 3 cars that I remember. My brother-in-law lived on a farm very close to where we lived, and so I would go over there and he'd let me ride his horses, and I remember the name of one horse. It was Barney. I don't remember the names of the others, but yes, I did ride horses occasionally. My father read a lot. I still can see him sitting at the end of the table in his chair, reading various books and reading the Bible, and he always allowed me to interfere with his reading. I would style his hair. He didn't have much hair, but he would let me brush his hair and comb his hair, and he was very patient with me as a little girl. My mother did a lot of handwork. She knit and tatted and crocheted and whatever there was to do, she would do it. And she and I played a lot of games in the evenings to pass the time and for relaxation.
Great.
Every fall there would be harvest festivals. People would gather together like in their churches, and they would bring fresh vegetables and grain and decorate the front of the church, and we would celebrate harvest in that way. And also, as school kids, we always looked forward to Arbor Day, which for us was cleaning up the schoolyard and having a picnic, and it was just really exciting for us. Then also, I'm trying to think of the other thing that, oh, I remember that we had a sports day when we would have competitions. It was just with the kids in our school. We'd have races and high jumps and all of that sort of thing. And at the end of the sports, we would all get an chocolate-covered ice cream stick. And that was the only time we ever got it, so that was a huge treat for us. My mom, her name was Anna, was an amazing woman. She had a very strong work ethic. She worked hard in her home to keep it tidy, and she baked and canned and had a big garden and sewed, and she was always busy. And I think she had the motto that don't leave until tomorrow what you can do today. That was the way she operated, and she was very, very good companion to my dad when he would go out and maybe call on a sick person or some needy person. She would always go with him and be at his side. She was just a wonderful person. I have great admiration for my memory, for my mother and the memories I have of her. My mother had a natural ability as a chiropractor. She hadn't had any training. Her grandmother was a chiropractor, and she just had a natural touch. She actually, there were no doctors in the community, and people generally didn't go to a doctor, but she served a lot of people with her skills in setting sprained ankles and even dislocated shoulders and setting bones. She would make her own splints from flour sacks. She would sew little pockets and stick little the little sticks from the ice cream bars. She would save those, wash them, and stick them into the little pockets and make like a splint for a broken limb. So she was very innovative, very creative, and I appreciate her teaching me all the skills that I have. My mother was very successful in, she considered it first aid because she was not trained, and she would not charge more than a quarter or a dollar, or sometimes people would bring her maybe something from their garden or a chicken or whatever, and but she would never charge anyone whom she realized they couldn't pay. But I remember one incident. This gentleman had gone to a doctor, and I don't remember his specific problem, but he didn't feel he had been helped. So he came to my mother, and my mother said, "Now, you know I'm not licensed, so I don't want you to report me." And he promised he wouldn't. And so she helped him, and it was amazing because what the doctors couldn't do, she did for him. And I doubt that she charged him much more than $1, so that was a lot less expensive than going to a doctor. But she was always available. I remember people coming to our home, and we would always watch with curiosity as young children as they came to have my mother help them through some crisis. Yeah, she was very, very, very helpful to other people, not only as a chiropractor, but in many different ways. Basically, there were two forms of communication. One, of course, was letter writing, and the other one was the telephone, which was very different from the telephones we have now. Of course, to write a letter, you had to have a writing tablet and envelopes and stamps. And since our trips to any place, any shopping place, were infrequent, you had to think ahead and make sure you had all those things on hand. And sometimes we just used the paper that we had available at home, whatever that may be. But yes, letter writing was very, very important because it actually was the main way we communicated. Okay, the telephones we had when I was growing up were the ones mounted on the wall. Every person in our neighborhood had a different ring pattern. For instance, the ring for our phone was long, long, short, short. But everybody in your neighborhood heard your ring, and we heard everybody else's ring. So if they wanted to listen in on your call, all they had to do was lift the receiver. And you could sometimes tell other people were listening because you could hear noises on the phone. Mm. And then there were the long distance calls, and you had to dial the operator, and then she would dial your long distance number for you. And but you would have to give her all the details of the call, the number, etc. The telephones we had didn't provide much privacy because when your phone would ring, the other people on your line would hear it and they could listen in. And then sometimes the messages, telephone messages, became gossip messages. They would be, people would call each other and relate what they had heard, which should have been your private call. But there was also a ring for the whole neighborhood when everybody else listened in, because that's how they made announcements for the neighborhood. And it could be a death or just a general having a meeting or whatever. That's the way they used to pass on the information. So the telephones were really important to us, but very different from today's telephones. There's quite a difference between letter writing and emailing. When you write a letter, you give it a lot of thought. And I remember rewriting my letters because I didn't like the way I had them worded, but I had time to think about it and before I mailed it. It's very easy when you're sending emails, as we do today, to not give it as much thought. And you write a message and you can send it immediately, and sometimes you wish you had given it more thought and expressed yourself in a different way. But emails also have a real benefit in that you can send just a brief message of maybe it's just a bit of information that you want the other person to have, the person you're communicating with. So I think there are a lot of benefits to emailing, but there are also those negatives that you have to be really thoughtful in how you compose your emails. The only time I ever went to a doctor was in an emergency when I got very sick. I was 10 years old. It was January. There was a lot of snow on the ground. It was very cold. And there was no way we could get to a doctor ourselves from our home. So somebody took me on a sleigh, horse-drawn sleigh, to a town that was maybe 10 miles from where we lived, where the highway was open and my uncle had his car running. And he took me to the city in his car, and we went to the doctor. By that time it was late in the evening, And the doctor took one look at me and rushed me to the hospital, and I had emergency appendectomy surgery. My appendix was about ready to rupture. That's why I was so sick. So it was difficult in the wintertime to get medical care because many of the roads were closed by snow. And so we either had to find a way to get to the main highway, which was kept open, as we had to do when I was so sick. And then I was in the hospital for 10 days, and then they put me on a train, and I went home by way of a train that ran through all the small towns in our area, and I finally arrived at home. But nothing was easy. It was time-consuming and sometimes not even safe, the way things went with our medical care. Our diets were very different back in those days. My mother always had a big garden, and she canned fruit and vegetables and meat and everything for the winter months because it was very difficult for us to get to a store to purchase our food items. But the food was also much healthier because the animals ate good food. And of course, like I mentioned, that our fruit and vegetables from our gardens was very healthy. So we had a very healthy diet, and I don't remember eating much canned food outside of the food my mother canned, but I mean, our foods were actually very healthy and very pure because we just didn't use pesticides. I remember as a child, we would walk along the rows of potatoes that were growing in our gardens and pick off they were called potato beetles, and they would injure the potato plants. So we would just pick those by hand. We didn't spray anything. So our foods were very healthy, and it was really a good way to grow up, and we were actually generally very healthy. So I think I attribute that to the foods that we ate when I was growing up. I remember, I believe I had just graduated from high school, and my dad had just recently bought a new car. So my parents and I and my sister Betty went on our first really long trip that took us out of the area in which we lived, which was all prairie. And we drove through the Rocky Mountains, which was an amazing experience because I had not ever seen mountains before. And I remember how scary some of the roads were because they were very narrow and very curvy. And so we drove across to British Columbia, and we experienced a whole new way of life there with our relatives and friends. Then we drove along the coast to Oregon, and then we got to see the ocean, which was just an amazing experience. So that was our first really long trip where we saw things that we had never before seen in our lives. And it was exciting, and it was fun. Autograph books were very common when I was growing up. I received this one when I was 12, and so whether they were your friends at school or in church or wherever you went, you had your autograph book, and people would write short verses or poems or whatever they wanted to write. It was up to them. Some of them even drew pictures. And this is a rather strange verse. It says, "Remember me when far, far off, where the woodchuck dies of whooping cough." I have no idea what that means, but those are the kind of verses that were commonly written in autograph books. So that was just a little side that we had in school, and kids would bring their autograph books and we'd all write in them. So it's a good way to remember a lot of the old friends that we had when we were growing up.